This is Game Changers. Elevate your game for good with expertise and inspiration from Notre Dame, Accenture, Hallow, and the University of Texas at Austin. From Zoomers to Boomers, the generations at work uncover strategies for recruiting and retaining talent across generations. Game Changers is powered by Irish Compass, the university's official professional network for Notre Dame alumni. Welcome to Game Changers.
Good evening and welcome to the Game Changers series brought to you by the University of Notre Dame's Alumni Association and our sponsor Young ND, which supports our young alumni. Thanks for joining us. My name's Adam Cronk. I'm going to serve as the moderator for our panel tonight. I'm the Director of Research and External Engagement for the Institute for Ethics and the Common Good here at Notre Dame. We're the administrative home for the campus-wide ethics initiative identified in the new strategic framework for the university. And I can't miss an opportunity to mention our mission, which is to convene a multidisciplinary community of scholars, students, and leaders to advance moral understanding and develop compelling responses to the most pressing ethical issues of our era. Inspired by the Catholic intellectual and social tradition, we then promote broad ethical inquiry in service to human dignity, interdependent flourishing, in the common good. And it's in that spirit that I was very excited and interested in joining this conversation tonight. If we're going to talk about interdependent flourishing and the common good, then the topic of multiple generations in the same workforce is certainly a bullseye. The program tonight is called From Zoomers to Boomers, the Generations at Work. And it focuses on the reality that there are, depending on who you ask, 4, 5, or even 6 generations currently working alongside one another. To set the table for the conversation tonight, I just want to make a few quick observations about this topic overall. One is that talking about and studying generational differences is an imprecise science, and we are going to focus less on the boundaries between where one label starts and the next one stops. And we're going to focus more about things like what events have shaped large groups of people. How are they motivated? What are their preferred communication styles? And what worldview might they be bringing to the workplace? We'd really like to keep this away from the old kind of kids these days kvetching, which is, by the way, not a new thing. This goes back to the beginning of time. And so what we really want to do is focus on the strengths that exist in the various groups of people of all ages in our workforce today. So in that spirit, keeping a positive frame and hoping to walk away with practical steps to collaborate better, let's dive in. I'll quickly introduce the panel. We've assembled 3 incredible human beings who have a lot of insight from different angles on this topic. First, from the corporate world, we've got Amanda Van Overbeck. She's the Chief of Staff for Accenture America's CEO. Accenture, as you all likely know, is a Fortune 500 company with 750,000 employees, serving clients in over 120 different countries. They provide professional consulting and technology services. They were recognized by Newsweek this past year as one of America's most admired workplaces, which means that the people who work there respect the place, and it's a place that job seekers want to work for. Accenture is a company that has long and successfully recruited at Notre Dame and is one of the top professional service firms in the world. Amanda has a wealth of experience gained over her 28 years at Accenture. And while not a Notre Dame alum, her husband was class of 96, and she's got 2 boys. One graduated this past year and another is a junior. And so we're very pleased to have you with us tonight, Amanda. We've also got Alessandro DeSanto, who's the co-founder and CFO of Hello. I would bet that most of the people joining tonight are also pretty darn familiar with Hello. It's a global startup. It's the #1 prayer and Catholic app in the world. It's got over 20 million downloads, and it's been used to pray over 600 million times so far. And it's available in over 150 countries. Alessandro was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2022. He was in the midst of a successful career on Wall Street and left to focus on helping people pray. And we are really, really thrilled to have you with us tonight, Alessandro, class of 2015 from Notre Dame. And finally, we've got David Yeager, who's one of the world's most influential developmental psychologists, who has written a New York Times bestseller on the science of motivating young people. It's titled 10 to 25. I've read it myself. I actually pre-ordered it, David, because I was paying attention to it. And it is it's a page turner. He is a double domer and has also earned a master's and a PhD from Stanford. He's a thought leader who gets consulted by companies like Google, Microsoft, Disney. He has worked with the World Bank, the White House. His research is focused in every major outlet you can think of. And when this topic was mentioned, David, you came to mind because of the way that you frame working with young people in what I believe is a very proactive and constructive way. So just welcome to all three of you. Thank you so much for the gift of your presence tonight. And with that introduction aside, let's dive in. I'll say real quickly, we want you in this conversation too. In terms of our audience, we're going to take questions. If you type them into the online chat feature, we are going to carve out a healthy chunk of this hour, probably roughly the last quarter, to definitely take questions and hear answers from our panelists. So please type your questions in, and we'll curate some of those and make sure we address them while we've got you here. So my first question is for Amanda. If we could start this discussion out with you walking us through what you see as the strengths of having a multiple generational workforce.
I sure can. And first I want to say thank you for having me, Adam, and to all my new friends at Irish Compass. And it's always a pleasure to speak with folks from Notre Dame, and including David and Alessandro. I will say I love this question. At Accenture, diversity is in the workplace is our superpower. We would not be the company we are without it. All of the different perspectives are really required in order for us to bring innovation to our clients. And I would say we are very intentional about hiring and also developing people who have different backgrounds, different perspectives, and different experiences in their life. So having people from different generations is super important. But it goes beyond that. When we look at diversity in the workplace, we're looking at people who have college degrees and maybe people who have come through an apprentice program and don't have a college degree. We're looking to make sure we have equal measures of gender in the workplace. We have people from different ethnicities and races. We have veterans and more. So different ages is one thing, but it's diversity is for us is a little broader than that. We're very intentional about bringing people in from different backgrounds. And so, when I think about the generational aspect, and I go back to Accenture is at its heart a technology company. So when I started, my experience was with an Apple IIe, and we used a modem, and we had dial-up access to the internet, and it was a big deal to get on the internet. I would say I didn't even have a laptop at Accenture until I had been promoted the first time. So 2 years at Accenture without even a laptop. People who are coming into the workforce today are super fluent in technology, more than I ever was. And they don't know a time where you weren't always connected, which is good and it's bad. So there's such a different perspective, my generation, other generations that have come in, and even the ones before. So when you have these different generations that come in, they bring this institutional knowledge, right? So maybe my generation brings a set of problem solving skills where you had to bring out your paper and your pen and kind of work through your algebra problem. We didn't have Google, so we did, we solved things on our own. But then you have people who are coming in now who have had the ability to, say, okay, I know how to do all that stuff. Maybe that stuff's a little bit easier, but they bring in a world knowledge, and they bring in access to technology and applications that I've never seen before. And so we have this melding of ideas at a technology company, from problem solving to these new technologies that are coming in and changing faster than anyone had imagined. And that's what is our superpowers, in being able to bring all those together. So, I would say we have a workforce at Accenture, like you said, 750,000 big, that spans truly 5 generations. And we need people at all levels, in the organization. And we need people who come from all these different backgrounds, and age is one of them.
I love it. A follow-up question on those comments, then, Amanda. What are, if you can cover a little bit, there are, I'm sure, some challenges and opportunities, when it comes to working across these generations. And what does Accenture see as strategies when it comes to communicating and collaborating, effectively?
Yeah, that's interesting. And there's not a one answer that suits all. There's no magic tool or process that we use. But I would say it always starts, understanding any of the challenges and understanding what our opportunities might be, starts with listening. And the listening, we call it a listening framework, right? We're a consulting company, so we have a framework for everything. But we have a listening framework that includes things like surveys, right? When you have so many people, even in the Americas, we have 90,000 people. So, there's some surveys that go out so we understand trends and sentiment. There are focus groups so we can understand, okay, well, we're hearing and we're seeing this, and what does that mean? And then we have conversations in smaller groups. And all of those things combined, and we use tools for some of them, come together to form our listening framework. And it's not something that happens once a year with a conversation or a magical survey. It's something that it's like a living, breathing thing where we're getting feedback from our people. And I spend the majority of my day talking to folks, and it's amazing what I learn, the relationships that I build, the problems that you solve, just by listening and being open to those conversations. So it is our listening framework for sure, that we use to understand the challenges and try and come up with these opportunities. And I would say that there's different ways that we try and approach different generations. We have a benefit site where we're trying to, understand what people need, and we're trying to address both generations, multiple generations on that site. So you go look at our benefit site, and you see, okay, the first event is becoming a parent, and the next one is becoming Medicare eligible. Mm-hmm. So right there, we're saying we're trying to address everybody's needs and try and meet them where they are. We have different programs that target childcare, mental health, LGBT plus offerings, and we have all of those because we've listened to our people. And then I would love to say that we have a framework and we have a process and we've rolled something out and it's perfect and we never have to change it. But I feel like as soon as we roll it out, it's old news. The processes and the way that we used to listen to people and gather feedback and information pre-COVID is very different post-COVID. What we can use to get people into an office pre-COVID and post-COVID is very, very different. And it's motivated in some ways by, generational aspects, but also by, people's lived experiences. And so, I think long story short, it is a constantly evolving framework, but it goes back to, we need to listen to our people. And if I could just say one more thing, when I spend time with my own team, I actually don't look at how old people are. I don't even look at their race and ethnicity. What I really look at is what are people's strengths. So there is a tool for anyone that's out there. Gallup has something called the Strengths Finder. You can find out what how you rank on the top 34 strengths. But it's really important to understand the strengths of your team and how to bring together a very robust, diverse team. And so I personally like using like Strengths Finder. It tells me that I am not a very good at including people. Includer is my lowest strength. And so I want to make sure that I have somebody that has includer way high on their strengths list. So we're making sure to get that variety of thought in our discussion. So I would leave it as, we really need to make sure we're listening to people. And there's a variety of ways to do that, whether you're looking at the big groups or the small groups, and they're equally important. And it is a constantly evolving framework.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Alessandra, I'd love to turn to you. You and Alex have been in the midst of scaling this thing up that you've been building, and I'm sure scaling involves hiring, right? And so you are probably out there on the cutting edge, seeing what you're looking for, what differences you're noticing, and I'd just love you to riff for a little bit. What are you seeing as you scale up this enterprise? In terms of trends in generational differences?
Yeah, absolutely. And excited to be here. So maybe for a little context, we're about 6 years in, 3 co-founders, founding team of 7, all Notre Dame, 2015. So very strong Notre Dame DNA. And I would say then we had no idea what we're doing or making it up. And in many cases, we're still doing that. But some things that maybe some lessons that we've learned along the way. For the record, I agree with everything Amanda just said, and so I don't want to repeat any of those things. But maybe some marginal additions. We really come to think about, in a startup, everyone's wearing multiple hats, right? And so the ability to operate in that level is important. But equally important, because people wear so many hats, there isn't really this ability to have backups and layers for everything, and so the idea of complementarity, hiring for complementarity, is a really important thing for us. And I think how that shows up is both obviously in skill sets and life experience, but also different perspectives. And a lot of those include generational perspectives. So a couple ways that manifests. I'm a big believer in the Who hiring method. If anyone's like in hiring or things, there's a famous book called Who, G.H. Smart, a book. And one of the ideas in the book is that before you start hiring, the first thing you do is you create a scorecard of like what you want this person to do. And I think one of the important parts that that accomplishes is that it undercuts some of the natural biases we may have, particularly in a young startup culture run primarily by millennials, to go naturally towards similarity instead of complementarity for hiring people like you. If you put on paper the things you actually need to accomplish and then compare the people, the candidates, and what they've done, what they've demonstrated ability to do on kind of objective standards, you can kind of short circuit a lot of those natural biases against going towards complementarity. And the second thing I would add is that there is particularly in a startup world where things are moving fast, we tend to not have the time or skills or resources to invest in as many of the training programs that you might get at places like Accenture. And I think one of the natural benefits of a age-diverse workforce is that you have built-in mentorship and perspective without necessarily all of the structures and resourcing around training. And so having people that have maybe lived different things out, it can act as natural mentors and teachers. And that can be directional when it comes to age, but obviously the more experience you've had, the more things you tend to have done. And so those are two things that come to mind: the natural complementarity piece and being intentional about how you allow that to manifest to avoid some of the biases, and then some of the benefits, particularly in maybe smaller organizations or fast moving organizations, picking up some inherent mentoring and leadership benefits by being diverse on the age spectrum.
It strikes me, Alessandro, that so Amanda mentioned the younger generations being, growing up more comfortable with technology, and you're running an app. And what's interesting about your app is that its use is in some ways counter to what most of the trends of technology trying to be uber connected would be. You're trying to use an app to have people, and I won't put words in your mouth, but do something different than most technology is doing. Does that play a role in the team you try to create and the the strengths of different generations?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, for the record, I think we are being countercultural, and that we should be maybe take a step back from constant connectivity and focus our lives not on our own will, but on discovering God's will for us, so that we can adhere to it. And it's great to be at a place, in a forum like Notre Dame, we can talk about that. The thing that comes to mind is that one of the natural strengths of building as a founder is you build for yourself in many ways, right? You identify a problem and you build a product around that, and you are the initial test cohort, and so you build, assuming that there are other people out there like you. That's good at the beginning, but one of the natural questions you have to answer as you scale is, how do you build a product for the entire, whatever your market is? And for us, we're trying to meet each person where they're at in their own spiritual journey, whether that's age, state of life, progression down a spiritual journey, whatever that means for you. And I have as an individual, I have a very limited perspective. As a leadership team, we have a very naturally limited perspective because we're only so many people. I think it's important, particularly in a consumer, focused company, to build a team that represents the users you're trying to serve. And there are things that you can't, you can run big market studies. I'm sure, one day we'll hire Accenture and they'll tell us all the things we don't know about our user base. But one of the hacks maybe to get around running expensive market segmentation stuff is to just hire a diverse group of people that are people you aspirationally want to serve. And then in the team, you have built in different user perspectives. And for sure, we have built different things that have proven to be really successful that we would have never thought of ourselves, by virtue of the fact that people coming from different life experiences and states of life have different needs, and they can bring them, and we build them as a team. So that's the first thing that comes to mind on that front, is actually, hopefully, depending on what your market is, your employees are some of your power users, and having them on board allow you to build a better product.
Love it. David, let's pivot over to you. I know you're in the midst of talking about this book that you wrote pretty much every day, all day. And so this is, I can't think of a more relevant perspective to bring to bear on this than someone who eats, sleeps, and dreams about how do you motivate and work with young people. Can you give us one? I'd love to just know, like, what's the thumbnail summary? What do people on this call need to know about your research and the point behind this book as a backdrop for this conversation?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I still can't get over that Alessandro got Mark Wahlberg on a Super Bowl ad. Like, that's pretty awesome. I'm a professor. I studied developmental psychology, I was a PLS grad at Notre Dame, and then I went and did ACE, the teaching program, and I felt like I was a teacher mainly as a service. I did lots of Center for Social Concerns kind of stuff at Notre Dame, and I learned very quickly that teaching is way more than just like motivating 13-year-olds to like be good people. Like, they actually have to learn how to analyze an essay and like be better writers. And I felt like, despite how great of a program ACE was, a lot of the advice in the scientific literature wasn't that effective in helping me solve the problems that I needed to solve, which is, how do I connect with young people and motivate them and cause them to be resilient? And one interesting thing, as I left teaching and went to Stanford to do my PhD in psychology, and I learned that there's a lot of similarities between what works for a 10 to 12-year-old as it relates to what works for a 22-year-old. And specifically, this idea that young people are craving a sense of status and respect, a sense that you matter, that other people view you as a valuable person, like a contributor to your culture, to your group, that you have like something about you that matters beyond yourself. And that's, I found, as true for junior employees showing up at law firms or tech companies as it is for 13-year-olds who just want to belong. And so what I've tried to articulate it in my book is like, all right, well, who are the great leaders who actually help young people find that sense of status and respect? like who help them be someone who's, I don't know, prestigious but like in a good way, not in like frivolously seeking likes on Instagram, but like you can do something that could keep your group alive, that could change society, that could improve the world. That like feeling that you are of consequence is really motivating for a lot of young people. And so is the opposite. The idea that you're a nothing, that you don't matter at all. That's like very demotivating. And so I tried to articulate in the book what great leaders are doing that tap into that and do it well. And that's everything from, who's the best manager at Microsoft and how do they keep young tech employees? Who's the best grocery store manager in Norway? His name is Ule, by the way. And I followed him for like 2 years and I interviewed all his employees and all his assistant managers and his like assistant managers and his direct reports. Who's the best high school physics teacher in Texas? His name is Sergio Estrada. And I called him every Friday for 3 years. And the big punchline is that these people help young people have a sense of respect. They have a sense of status, but they do so by having extremely high standards. And they're very supportive as people meet those standards. And that's what I call a mentor mindset. And probably everyone on this call can think back on a time where they were a player or they were in band or you were a junior employee or you had a professor or whatever it is. And the person who changed your life is rarely the person who had super low standards for you, who was like, just do whatever, like you'll be great. And it's also very rarely the person who yelled at you that you didn't meet an impossible standard. It's usually the person that changed your life is usually the person who expected more of you than you knew you could accomplish, but then walked the journey with you until you met that standard. And that's what I call a mentor mindset. And it's that I don't mean mentor like you have to have coffee with everyone on Thursdays and tell them what their job should be. What I mean is like at any given moment, you're aligning the resources that you have with someone's long-term well-being, growth, and development. And there's a lot I write about this. It's very surprising and really interesting, but ultimately matches the intuition that many of us probably have on this call, which is that, if you take someone's dignity seriously and you care about someone enough to push them, then they will take themselves seriously and they'll work really hard. And the punchline for the theme of this call is like, a lot of people are out there saying, young people don't want to work hard. They're just a bunch of like lazy, woke, wimpy idiots who like don't care about anything. And that's not my experience. My experience is really that young people are just more discerning in where they're going to deploy their attention and motivation. And in the 90s and earlier, maybe we were okay just hating our jobs until our mid-30s. We were like, well, I got a paycheck at least. And I think young people today are just a little more, they're like, it kind of, you can take me seriously and respect me while also compensating me. And I think that they're a little more selective. And I don't think that that's because they're entitled. I think it's because the toothpaste is out of the tube. We know that life in the workplace can be better than it has been in the past. And they're aware of that and they're asking for it. And I don't think they're crazy to ask for it. And I think if we want to attract and retain the best talent in whatever industry we're in, then we have to take that seriously. And so that's really what I write about in the book. That's all I have to say about it.
What's that?
That's all I have to say about it for
That's
now
all you have to say
until
about
the
that.
next question.
Will you? Okay, so I would love to hear from Amanda and Alessandro how those thoughts land with you, and what resonates. But I can't resist, David, asking you also to comment on one of the things that I was just nodding my head at when I read your book before you got to proposing the mentor mindset was this notion of this neurobiological incompetence model, which is a pretty sticky thing that I feel like a lot of people carry with them around in their head during the day. Would you just explain what that is? And to me, I think then your idea is that's not a productive way of framing it. The way you just explained it is.
Yeah, I mean, the very short version is that a lot of scientists have said, look, you can't expect anyone under the age of 27 to make a rational, logical choice because their prefrontal cortex is not developed. And so the idea is like, yeah, I know you started puberty at 11, but even though your hormones are raging and you want to be an adult and you want to have responsibility and you want to be in charge of stuff, you don't matter until your early 30s. Is like, that's the societal view, because your brain is too impulsive, that your emotional regions of your brain are going nuts and your prefrontal cortex isn't powerful enough yet to constrain that impulse. And, as I'll be a PLS major for a second, and if you read the Phaedrus, the Platonian dialogue, there's this metaphor of the like emotional winged horses circling the air, going up to the heavens, and they're out of control. And like, luckily, there's a charioteer that can lash and whip the passions into having discipline. And that's a metaphor for the prefrontal cortex kind of managing the limbic system in the brain. And the idea that's been around for thousands of years is that when you're in the middle of growing up, then your emotional regions are out of control and your prefrontal charioteer is not yet powerful enough. And so that's why you have all kinds of dumb stuff that teenagers do. And that general view is what I call the neurobiological incompetence model, that there's a puberty-induced frontal lobotomy that prevents teenagers from making wise choices. And look, I get it. I mean, I know teenagers do dumb stuff, like they throw rocks off bridges and other things that we wouldn't do. But most adults, when they look back on their younger years, they laugh. They're like, "Oh, wait, weren't we hilarious? Look at the dumb stuff we did." But obviously, we weren't. It wasn't that bad. But then when young people do the same stuff today, they're like, "Well, society's going to hell in a handbasket. Like, these kids, there's something wrong with them." And what I argue is that it's not the case that our neurobiology causes young people to be incapable of rational, logical thought. It's impossible for them to delay gratification. An alternative view is that they just deploy their considerable cognitive resources for other stuff besides what adults want them to. So again, take the case of a high schooler. What adults want them to do is to factor trinomials and balance stoichiometric equations, right? That's what most 15-year-olds are supposed to be doing. And they're like, well, you're not doing that. Don't you care about what wage you're going to get in your mid-30s? And the kids are like, that's so long from now. I'm not really interested in that. But if you ask them to sneak out of the house and go to a party, they're very good at planning ahead. They're like, who do I have to lie to? Where's the map of the sewers? Like, I'm going to sneak out of this place. And so, and we just had the Olympics this summer, and young people clearly showed amazing self-control for like a decade before they became the best, volleyball player or whatever the sport was. So it takes incredible dedication, self-control, discipline, etc. And so the real challenge for managers is, how do I tap into the motivational prioritization of young people's brains? Instead of thinking them as purely incompetent, they're instead directed at different kinds of stuff than maybe we think about in our 40s and 50s. And once we understand what those things are, then actually not only can they be great workers, but we as mentors can change their lives. And we can, in our professional careers, with young people 20, 30 years younger who show up at our funerals or our retirement parties and are like, this person changed my life. They were tough but supportive, and they mentored me at a time when I was new in my career. And I think that a lot of us would get a great deal of gratification out of the idea that you leave behind you a wake of young people that you've inspired to be their best, not because you look down on them for their neurobiological incompetence, but because you found a way to tap into what most deeply motivated them.
Thank you so much. Amanda, let's go to you. What resonates about David's framing here in your experience at Accenture?
I think you said several very interesting things, David, and I hope that one day we get to meet for a cup of coffee and toss some ideas back and forth. But the one that really stuck with me is when you talked about how some of the younger generations are more discerning today. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. So I remember when I first started at Accenture and someone told me to do something and I said, sure, and I'm going to do it really well. I'm not sure that I ever asked why. So it was a lot about, tell me what to go do and I will go do it. And as I progressed in my career, I want to know what, but really I want to know why. Like, why am I doing this? So I find myself asking why a lot. And I thought that maybe that just came with age. But what I have found is that it doesn't. I think it's just a total shift. And I think we shortchange ourselves, and we would shortchange people at Accenture if we only talk to the younger generation about the what now. I don't believe that that's motivating. And so when I talk to my teams and when I talk to larger groups at Accenture, I talk a lot about the why first. Why are we doing this? What problem are we trying to solve with our client? So I get the why, you get people excited, they start to see how they can fit in. And then we talk about the what. Okay, now you need to go do this, and you need to go do this. And this is by when we need to have it done. And people are like gung ho. And the best part about giving them the what and the why, well, the why first and then the what, is oftentimes the people on my team have better ideas on how to get it done than I do. And so until I started telling people about the what and the why, they did what I asked them to do because I was their boss. But when I started talking about both sides of it, I got a much better answer from the group of people working for me. And then what I've seen, which is so exciting, is some of the people who used to work for me who are now leading other teams. They say, well, I did it your way. Like, we talk about why we're going to go do something, and then everyone's excited to go do it. So I think the more discerning, to me, that means people need to understand the what and the why. And the why sometimes is even more important.
And that I think is a good example, Amanda, of maybe it's true that a younger generation has a higher desire for that wasn't being expressed in say the 90s. But it's certainly good for everyone in the workforce, regardless of their age, to be managed like that and led like that. I mean, it's certainly not exclusive to young people that would be an effective approach.
Yeah.
Alessandro, how about you? What about David's ideas there do you find bearing out in your work at Hello?
Yeah, I mean, I in the middle of it, I'm officially purchased on Amazon, so the book is coming, and I look forward to digging in deeper. Yeah, I mean, I think there is and I'm going to forget the exact language of the model you used. That is not the right one, David. But yeah, I agree. What I would call like the pessimistic view of Gen Z or just young workers in general. I think it starts, with a fundamental misunderstanding of like what it is to manage people. And I heard like that that is the ideas that they're triggered in listening to David. And it's like, if you think a junior person is like a commodity, like I'm trying to think of the right physics terminology, but like work production engine, where you like put in money and you get out X lines of code a week, or a whatever the quote sales quota a week, and their purpose during the time where they are on the clock is to successfully repeat a prescribed set of behaviors over and over again to maximize their output. Maybe that is the right perspective in like a Hershey Kiss manufacturing facility where you're just trying to like do things over and over again. But I think one of the realities of evolving into a more knowledge work ecosystem, particularly in a remote environment, and in a world where technology should and is being used to try and automate a lot of those commoditized input output parts of labor, is the team is the part that should apply creative force to bring about a desired goal. And so one of my reactions was exactly what Amanda said, where like the prescription of how to do things is usually not a consistent determinant of what ends up working. One of the things we really focus kind of our one-on-ones about, our performance feedback structure, is around clear articulation of goals and expectations, and putting the manager in a position where it's their job to be a either person that can bring context or remove roadblocks to enable whatever the individual contributor is supposed to be doing to complete their job. So like the manager says, here's the goal, we agree on the goal, how can I help you do that? And I think that type of framing, which is basically what I heard Amanda say, is really empowering, but also gives the required support for someone that can say, okay, great, I want to do that. I don't know how. Right? Like that is the legitimate reaction that many people might have. And in that case, the right job of the manager is to teach them. In other cases, it says, hey, got it. I think this should be a good way to do it. Manager can say, okay, great, go do it. Right? What the manager should be doing in a given situation starts with identifying a goal and then listening, right, to Amanda's point, on what is required to get there. And I think all of that is very much in line with, let's say, the Zoomer generation. I spend a fair amount of time thinking about like why young people are leaving the church, right? And so there's a lot of research on that. And one of the interesting things that comes to mind as we're thinking about this relationship is that there's been a overall decline in just trust in institutions generally. And authority used to come with credentials. And so that could be your priest, that could be your CEO, that could be your bank teller. And whether you look at big politics, big business, big church, people's willingness to just do what they're told and trust the system is out there to do the right things is down across the board. What has replaced that, and at least the research I've looked at, is this concept of relational authority and kind of building trust with an individual person that you are on the same team, you're achieving the same goals, and that you have a valued perspective and role to play. And so I think if we think about how we grow our organizations as managers and as leaders about building trust and relational authority by setting the right goals and working hand in hand to do them, each with our own roles and responsibilities, I think that really empowers the fullest actualization of both Zoomers and Boomers and everybody in between by kind of reframing the conversation of what is labor.
So as piggybacking on that and seeing that this was a question that folks asked as well, I certainly want to be cognizant that this is not a one-way street, older generations managing younger generations. We certainly have a phenomenon of young people. We got a lot of young people on this call as well. So there are young people on this call who are tasked with managing folks who are from older generations, and that's its own ball of wax. And also, what does it take to be managed well and to kind of be the managee and the recipient of that mentor mindset? So maybe I'd love to have all three of you potentially cover both of those topics. Let's start with this concept of advice or things you've seen work out or ways of thinking about a younger person at work who's managing a team that might have folks who are from an older generation, say they're 10, 20, even 30 years, their senior. What have you seen work?
I'm happy to start with that one if that's okay with the group. I will start with saying I have done this when I was young and managed people who were older than I was. And the first time I did it, I did it terribly. So part of it is you have to give yourself a little grace, figure out what worked and figure out what didn't work. And if I reflect back on the first time where it really didn't go well, there was a couple of things ways in which I went wrong and that I tried to correct the next time. So the first thing is I came into it feeling like I needed to know everything. I was managing this team. I needed to have command of all the facts. I needed to know more than everybody on my team. And of course, that's not possible. But I tried and I came off that way and I wasn't approachable. And so I think the first thing is to acknowledge that people are on your team and they're bringing that diversity of thought. They're bringing that diversity of experience, and it's welcome. You welcome people who know more about maybe a technology or maybe have done this 5 times before. And it's good to invite those ideas and those thoughts in. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think you have to be open with people about what you're bringing to the table. I'm the lead of this team, and here's what I want to accomplish as your leader. But there's other things that I don't know. So I think being humble and being approachable and listening is so important. So, again, don't think that you have all the answers. You don't need to try and act that way. And then really help people understand what you bring to the table and how you can help the team. And then listen. Like as you're going, you got to listen. I mean, when you are leading a team, sometimes it will go incredibly well, and then sometimes things go off the rails. And that's when I mentioned that listening framework at the beginning. Part of that is just constantly talking to your team, picking up the phone, talking to them. How's it going? How are you feeling about this? And make that space to really listen. And I mean, like really listen, which means not responding right away to people, just saying, okay, my favorite phrase is tell me more, tell me more. Okay, I want to understand, tell me more, give me an example, help me understand. And I think if you are not coming in as the know-it-all, if you're really listening and you're helping people understand what you bring to the table, you're going to be successful leading all generations.
David or Alessandro, either one. Go ahead.
Yeah, happy to jump in. One thing super quickly. So I agree with Amanda, everything Amanda said. So I won't reiterate listening. I think one super tactical thing that I found helpful. We're up to about 100 full time now and 185, including part time and contractors. So I don't know. I've hired probably mid 30s or 40s people personally, and about half of them were older than me, half of them were younger than me, and managed most of those people. So one of the things I instituted that I think everyone found helpful was this idea of a management scouting report. So I discovered this thing through, I think, a private equity fund that has used it in their portfolio companies called Parker Gale. But it's a 2x2 grid where you as a person fill this out about yourself, and then you kind of, when a new person joins, you all go around and share your scouting report with the team. And the idea is that if you're on a sports team, your professional team, or Division I team, someone on your team's job is to be a scout. You go watch the other people play. You pick up their tendencies so that you can come into the game playing to those tendencies or against those tendencies, instead of having to spend the first half of the game trying to figure things out the hard way, getting beat, having tough outcomes, and then trying to adapt mid-game. So the idea is, and I think it's particularly relevant in the cross-generational, either up or down, because just the way people's expectations of how they work and what they expect from others is very different. And so addressing those up front and talking about them explicitly help us to just make those tweaks that avoid some really friction-filled experiences that can often happen at the beginning of our interpersonal experiences. The four titles of things, which I'll read because I think they're helpful. One is the natural strengths that I lean on are, so giving people space to tell the other people, I am really good at this type of stuff. So if you're a manager, it gives your report confidence, okay, I can trust them to really own that. Or if you're a manager, the IC, okay, I can find things that can emphasize these traits or skills because I know they're really good at those. The second is I love it when people who work with or for me do XYZ. They tend to be communicational norms or how they receive praise or things like that. And that most of the time we're just flying dark on that. And so we just assume other people like the things we like and we do them and upset people without knowing it. And so just being able to praise people in the way they like to be praised, communicate in the way that they like to be praised can go a long way. The third is a tendency of mine that I may overuse or some people may find annoying is it demonstrates self-knowledge. It demonstrates that you're not perfect, and that when you experience it, it kind of gives the permission who is observing that to think about it as more of a you problem than a me problem. And obviously you're working on it and you try not to, not work on your weaknesses. But I think that diffuses a lot of tension because people at least own that, and people can replay that language back to them and say, hey, we talked about this, feels like this is one of those situations where you're leaning a little bit too much on X or whatever. And then the last one is at work, my triggers are whatever. And this one I found to be pretty different across the generational cohorts. I'm thinking of one particular person who was older than me who just really, really hates when people join Zooms late and understands that he has an irrationally emotional negative reaction to being 1 minute late. I tend to be 1 or 2 or 3 minutes late to a Zoom because I tend to be back to back and running to the restroom or grabbing water. But for him, I know that I'm going to join on the dot every time, and that just allows things to go more smoothly. So that's one super, super tactical thing that I have found at the beginning of a relationship, especially when people are joining teams or you're working with someone for the first time. Everybody brings their scouting report, you read those off, and you have a running start on how to work with one another.
Thank you so much. I love a good practical, tactical takeaway from a conversation like this. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share that. David, anything to add to that topic? I've got one other thing I'd love to ask you guys about, but anything that was missed?
I try to never join a Zoom on time. So no, I mean, I would just say that Amanda's right. I for a while I was working on a piece on all the tech layoffs that happened a year and a half ago or whenever that was. And I abandoned it because ultimately, like, highly qualified MIT engineers who were forced to move from Meta to Google wasn't like a sympathetic story. So no, I didn't care about those people. And so I abandoned the piece. But one thing I learned a lot was that in general, managers who came from fancy MBA programs and then thought of their relationship with their direct reports as a checklist, like they were almost reciting things they were supposed to do that they learned at their Stanford or Harvard MBA, that like everybody hated that basically. And so I think this idea that like, if you could imagine a young MBA coming from a top program and then managing a relationship like it's a checklist as with an older direct report, that's going very badly. And I heard a lot of that kind of stuff actually. And so I guess the only thing I would add to what Amanda said, which is like listening sounds obvious. You're like, oh yeah, of course you listen, but like listening's hard. And the reason listening is hard is because you think you know everything. And especially like the better institution you went to, the more confident you are that you know everything. And so I would actually be like extra concerned that you're like super bad at humility, the more like impressive your credentials are. And what people really don't like is when they have a legitimate problem and then they're managed in a way that makes them feel cookie cutter. Like they don't matter, like they're just another widget on like an assembly line. And that right, and like it gets back to respect, right? Like the more that you're managed like you're a cookie cutter on an assembly line, the more you feel dehumanized. And the number one way to make people feel disrespected is to dehumanize them. So it's just another way of echoing what Amanda says, and I think it's super important.
I love that point on just self-awareness and how you're showing up. I'll answer one question that I think can just be a quick factual answer to a question that was asked, which is Amanda had referenced a resource from Gallup earlier, and that is a tool called Strengths Finders, which I believe is all one word. But if that's not what you were asking about, Paul, go ahead and type in a different survey. But I'm relatively confident that that's the resource that you might have been asking about that Amanda mentioned. Last point, the hour certainly goes quickly. We did have a question about, okay, so we're thinking about motivating young people. What about motivating more experienced folks who may potentially be dug in or relatively committed to a viewpoint? We're all familiar with the because this is how it's always been done here answer for why we're doing something. That's never the best reason, but a pretty common one. Any wisdom to share on behalf of Erica here?
I feel bad for always going first, but I'll do it again. So I've also had experience with this. I bet all of us have who've been in the workforce for a period of time. And I often find that when people dig in, and people dig in at all ages, but I find that when people dig in, it's because they aren't feeling heard. And they probably feel like whatever they're doing is really right for whatever reason, or maybe they're really super pissed off and it really doesn't matter what they're digging in about. They're just going to dig in. And so that's where you have to go back. And I know I keep saying the same thing, but you have to go back and you have to listen and you have to ask questions. Tell me more. Tell me why. Help me understand. Well, if this is our objective, tell me how this is going to help us get there. And so, I often think of, there's two ways to lead teams. And there was a question about like a leader versus a manager. And my answer to that one and to this is, managers kind of lead, or they manage from the front. They tell people what to do. Here, you should go do this, you should go do that. And my visual image of a leader is someone who leads from behind or who leads from beside to get their team all moving forward in the same direction. And so if you have a case where maybe there's someone from a different generation or another different background, and they are dug in, you have to understand why, because standing in front of them and like pulling them with you isn't going to work. They're just going to dig their heels in further. What you need to do is you need to get beside them, and you need to understand what is happening and why is this happening, and then help chart a path forward together. I think that's the way to get everyone moving forward together.
Yeah, and I just want to double click on that. I agree. And just to add a little more texture to it, that's I think consistent. For my book, I went and found a bunch of great managers. So, and one of the people I had followed for a long time, her name is Steph Okamoto, and she was Microsoft's best manager, and then she eventually became the head of manager training and onboarding. So she defined customer or manager success for Microsoft. Now she's at ServiceNow and owns manager development for that company. And so I interviewed a lot of her direct reports to tell stories about how she did her job and like what was successful. And what I was amazed by was that she was never like solving problems for her direct reports. It was like their work, their projects, and then she was often removing barriers for their work. So it wasn't to be concrete. She had a young employee who was on HR, was in charge of global manager and employee onboarding. So Microsoft hired 30,000 employees during the pandemic. And so this one person was in charge of tracking the training and onboarding of all 30,000 new employees. And it turns out they did not have a dashboard to do this. This is amazing. It's Microsoft. And so she was like, we need a tech dashboard to track the progress for all 30,000 new hires. But she was an education person. She had done Teach for America before she came to HR. She didn't know how to manage a team of engineers. And so she made this plan with her manager, Steph, to go out and create the data dashboard to track the onboarding progress of all the 30,000 new employees. But that meant she had to interface with engineers who at tech companies are super protective of their time. And in fact, they look down on everybody else at most tech companies. They're like, look, I make $500,000 a year and you're a nobody. So I'm not giving you any of my time. And so Steph's main responsibility as the manager was to talk to the other manager and say, can you guys just be a little generous with your time here? And like Steph didn't manage the team. She just like created, it was like blocking and tackling stuff, right? Like creating space so that somebody else could thrive and flourish. And I think a lot of great management across generations is figuring out how to help someone else look amazing at their job. What is their stretch goal? How can they overperform? And then how do I get other stuff out of the way so that way you can grow and develop? And that's in my book, I read a lot about this idea of a mentor mindset, that my job isn't like to do stuff for you, and my job isn't to blame, shame, and condemn you. My job is to push you to be as great as you can be, but to like remove logistical barriers within our large bureaucracy of an organization. And I think that although my lens was young people, in general, anyone who wants to make a name for themselves in an organization wants that kind of experience. And so these kinds of ideas of feeling like you have a chance to earn status and respect, like I think they generalize across age groups.
Thank you so much. It's a refreshing point to end on. And please join me in thanking Amanda, Alessandro, and David for the gift of their time tonight. We appreciate you tuning in. Grateful for the sponsorship of Young ND, who serves our young alumni. This series, Game Changers, is brought to you by the Notre Dame Alumni Association. It's powered by Irish Compass, which is the university's official professional online community for alumni and students to network, access mentors. By the way, there's like a pool of 1,000 mentors who are Notre Dame alums who are happy to help serve as mentors, by the way, and help find jobs and more. So we invite you to be active participants on irishcompass.nd.edu. And we're just really grateful for your time tonight. Thanks for joining us, and go Irish.